All right, it is uh, a busy time for Rush fans, but we're concentrating on something different from what every other video about Rush is at the moment on the internet. It's celebrating 40 years of the Power Windows album, which of course came out in October 1985. I'm thrilled to be joined again by Tim Durling, who is a real Canadian for a start. And is it fair to say Rush superfan? I think that's probably fair.
Oh yeah, they're definitely right up there. Been a huge Rush fan. Well, this is exciting, Joe, because tonight the Power Windows. This was my entry point.
Was that contemporary as well? So are
Yeah,
you pretty
yeah,
much a fan for 40
it
years?
was in real time, and there are two songs that both are sort of milestone songs, not just for my Rush fandom, but well, we'll get into it. But yeah, this was a very exciting time.
For me, it's just one of those albums that came in a relatively early on in my Rush journey, but I'm sure we'll get into that as well. My experience getting into Rush is probably somewhat different to yours, I would imagine, especially because they really didn't make many waves down in New Zealand. Uh, I don't really know why, because they hit all the
Well,
other.
well,
I was
I
going
can
to say
think
all
of
the other big territories, but
think
yeah,
of a
go ahead.
good reason is because I don't think they're pretty sure they never toured down that way, and that makes a big difference.
Yeah, well, that's one of the things I'm wondering is because they did so well in the UK, but they toured here a lot. For those who don't know, I'm from New Zealand, but I'm in the UK now. So that if that confuses anybody when I talk about one or other place as though I'm there, I'm in the UK, and I saw them here twice.
You know, they really weren't what you'd call a sort of a world-beating band. They only played in Japan once on the Grace Under Pressure tour. So I thinking if they were going to get to Australia and New Zealand, it would have been then, right? While they were kind of over on
Right.
that hemisphere, so to speak.
Yes, no pun intended. Um, So we are tackling this album in my usual format, which is the random foreplay, which is, I think, a brilliant format that nobody else has stolen. So it seems that nobody just agrees with that. But well, we had fun last time, didn't we, when we looked at
Oh yeah,
Kansas?
yeah,
So
yeah.
I'm sure we'll have the same again. So for those who don't know, who may be joining us for the first time, this is an 8-song album, and we're going to hear 4 of those songs. But how we select them is all random, really. I'll throw the album on shuffle, and we'll take a turn each to take 2 choices that get thrown up in this random order, and pick songs along the way to discuss and indeed listen to. So I know you've got some key songs on here that you'll be particularly keen
Yeah, I hope
to
I
talk
don't have to
about, but we'll
choose.
see how it
I
comes
hope
out.
I don't have to choose between two songs in particular, but we'll see. Yeah.
Well, I hope I don't get to one of your absolute life-affirming songs and say, "Oh, that one's a bit rubbish. I'm not going to play that." Uh, but we shall find out. So let's kick off with some music, and it'll be Tim making the first choice here. So you ready to go and see what gets offered you?
Absolutely.
I have got the album fired up, ready to go, and your choices are. Anybody who doesn't recognize the intro of the album, that is the first 4 seconds of The Big Money. And option 2 for Tim is going to be Territories. So what have you got for us there?
Well, let me use visual aids for this. This, not this particular 45, I got this years later, but The Big Money is the first Rush song I ever heard. Uh, I heard
Makes
it,
sense.
yeah, I heard it late 1985. I was in my grade 6 school year, so I was 11 years old. It was over Christmas vacation, and I remember listening to the top 40 station that I always listened to, but late nights they would have a top 5 most requested songs, like a call-in thing, and I normally didn't listen that late. Knew of Rush. I knew there was a band called Rush, but I'd never heard them before. I really didn't know anything about them. So I heard The Big Money for like 5 nights running that week when I was on my Christmas break and able to stay up later. And I thought it was a catchy song. So I didn't become a fan right then and there, but that was the introduction. I still think it's one of my favorite songs. I think it's a really cool song. I found out later that there was a reason I was actually hearing it on top 40 radio. It was a near miss. It peaked at number 45 on the Billboard chart. So it came close to cracking the top 40, which, if for those that are keeping score, would have made the second top 40 single for Rush, because they only had one,
Yeah.
which was New World Man. But
They,
yeah, I pretty much, I
yeah, a
like,
couple of other times, but yeah.
they came close, and they had some, they had a lot, they had higher charting songs in the UK, but I like Territories, but I got to go with Big Money.
You know, given the same choices, I would have made the same pick, but not with the same exciting backstory to it. So I'm glad that they came to you to make that choice. So on that note, let's give a listen to the Big Money. Before I do play it, though, of course, for those watching on YouTube, which is everybody, because this isn't available anywhere else, but there will be two versions of this video. So one will not have the music in it for the most part, but there will be a link where you can go and hear all the songs with us. I'm assuming most people watching this know the songs, but you can never tell who's going to watch anything, can you? So if you're new to Rush, I would highly recommend checking the full-length video out and hearing the music so that you know what we're going on about. And what we're going on about is the opening track, the first single, The Big Money. Here we go. All right, sounding as good as ever there, I hope.
I love how the Neil did a slightly different drum fill every time, as that turnaround happens at the end.
Yeah.
With the last one being the most complicated because the triplet roll comes right before the crash.
I'm not a drummer, but I can hear him, and he's always amazed me. I always feel like I would have been a drummer in another life, but somehow didn't quite happen. Now, you were holding up the single there. I assume there was an edit on that because this album is consistent in a lot of ways. And one of those is that all the songs are between about 5 and 6.5 minutes.
So this is a Canadian single. Yeah, this is a single on Canadian one on Anthem Records, and it's the full album version at 5:39. But yeah, the radio edit was definitely shorter. If you watch the video, that's the version that radio tended to play, which probably shaves about, I would say it's probably shaves a good minute, maybe more like a minute and a half, makes it closer to 4 minutes. And like the intro is way shorter. It gets into the song quicker, but doesn't really take anything away from it. It's just when you're used to hearing the full version, it's a little jarring. But I understand, as somebody that works in radio, I understand that, because when you're programming, you want those shorter songs. You want to play as many songs in an hour as you can, and you want people to hear them. So I don't have a problem with edits that don't cut main parts of the song. And the idea is to get people to buy the album so they hear what it really sounds like anyway.
Yeah, it's kind of like an ad for the album.
Absolutely, yeah, that's the idea.
Yeah, it's sometimes, I mean, it does a disservice when you chop a song so that it's barely recognizable as the work as it is. But there's other edits that give you the essence of the song, but in a shortened time frame.
All the parts of the Big Money are in there. The sort of like what it kind of drops down in the middle. That's there. There's just half as many bars, so to speak.
Right. And when you were 11, I'm going to go out on a limb and say, even if you were a precocious 11-year-old, you probably didn't appreciate Neil's lyrics to the degree that maybe you do now.
No,
were they a factor at the time?
I had some of them wrong, because I used to think that when Geddy says a Cinderella story on A Tumble of the Dice, I thought he said a singer and a story. But there are lots of Geddy Lee lyrics. There are lots of Rush lyrics that I initially had very wrong. But yeah, the lyrics are, of course, Neil being on point as ever. It's about greed. And it's about, money can do good things. Money can do a lot of bad things. And but the whole theme of it is, especially we're smack dab in the middle of the 80s. It was the me decade, right? It was more. The video has them playing on a faux Monopoly type of board. It's probably, it was probably their most, I would say their most successful like MTV video, because I think it did get a lot of video play. I mean, it had to have gotten a fair bit of play to get all the way to 45 on the pop chart. That's fairly, that's pretty good. And by the way, that's actually the last time that they would put a single in the top 100, because starting with Permanent Waves, they at least had songs that were in the top 100 somewhere.
Right.
But that was the last one. But Yeah, they just, I mean, obviously Rush were never a singles band, but it is a catchy song. I can see why they went with it as the lead single. It's really, it has a wider appeal. But yeah, I don't think most people realize exactly. They're probably like, yeah, big money, man. Yeah, we like money. Money's good. Money for nothing, around that time. And
Yes.
but it was really, the lyrics are quite biting. But
Yeah. And that's the great thing. Or, well, there's a lot of great things about Rush in this period, and we should touch on that because, as you say, it is the 80s, and that divides people when it comes to music. One of the kind of generalizations I make about music is that nobody who made great music in the 70s made better music in the 80s. But I'm not sure that Rush isn't the exception to that rule. I know some would very firmly tie their masts to the 70s stuff, and I get that. But for my personal taste, at least, I'm an 80s Rush fan, and I'm not ashamed to say so. I did a random foreplay for Grace Under Pressure last year, which was uh, a, the original format which I had, which was just me and just literally playing whatever the first four songs were that came up. So no choices involved. Just the idea was to say, this is a great album. It doesn't matter what songs are coming, they're great. And that works for most albums, but not all of them. But it worked for that one. Um, and I said at the time, I know I was expecting more kind of pushback on my 80s Rush fandom, but that went over quite well. I was pleased to see. So be interesting to see how we go with this one. But they of course have a new producer on board
yeah,
for
that's
this, which is
a big change with this album because as most, as Rush fans know, from the mixing of their first album, the remixing of it, all the way up through Signals. Barry Brown was there, George Martin. He was there,
yeah,
he was the fourth member. They decided to stop working with him after Signals. They got Pete Henderson in for Grace Under Pressure. That was at the time, I think, the longest they'd ever been in the studio, and it was not a pleasurable experience for anybody involved, I don't think, because
yeah,
they were so used to working with one producer that getting another guy in that wasn't full of ideas wasn't. My understanding is that Getty and Alex have both said that Pete Henderson was an excellent engineer, but for making production decisions and song decisions, he would second guess a lot, and that's what took Grace Under Pressure such a long time. So they decided that, I mean, obviously they weren't going to work with him again. So yeah, they settled on Peter Collins, who, if anybody knows his resume, anybody that goes back and thinks of his resume would probably think, oh well, that makes sense. He worked with Queensryche, he worked with Alice Cooper, he worked with Suicidal Tendencies. Not at the time. At the time, he
yeah,
was known for working with Tracy Ullman and Nick Kershaw and Blancmange. So
yeah.
he
If
was
we're
not,
talking
and
1980,
he was not a
yeah, in
rock producer.
1985.
The closest that
So
he came to being a rock producer is that, and I think this is how Rush hooked up with him, is he produced Gary Moore, and Gary opened some shows on the Grace Under Pressure tour. That's how that came about.
yeah, there's even in the very tiny print liner notes, there's a shout out to Gary in there, and I assume that was how that came about because yeah, as you say, uh, I mean, there's kind of three. I don't know if you can call them all major albums, but when you look at Peter Collins in 1985, you've got Gary Moore, you've got Rush, and you've got Air Supply.
That's
Uh,
right. Yeah, which is, yeah, it's interesting. I mean, there's such a thing as being very versatile. And by the way, I'm lamenting the fact, not really, but I don't have any credits at the ready to look at the copy of Power Windows that I picked out, because this is one of my Rush Grails right here, one of my prized possessions.
oh wow.
This is the 8-track version of Power Windows, available only through the RCA Music Service in the US, even though the tape itself was made in Canada. And this is the last Rush album to be released in any way in this format. I had all of them up to Grace Under Pressure, which is equally hard to find. And I thought I had them all. And then eventually I discovered that this one existed. And earlier this year, I was able to track one down. I'm not at liberty to disclose what I paid for this tape, but I'm being very, very, very gingerly holding this for fear of destroying it. But yeah, this is now complete to my Rush 8-track collection. Sorry to take away, as you were, I just
No,
had to show this off.
absolutely. For those who don't know, Tim has an entire book about 8 tracks. He is uh, a dedicated 8 track fan, and I've never even seen one in the real world. I
And a
was
lot of it
when you
has to
held that
do
up, I
with
was
the
thinking,
fact, is highlighting the fact that albums like this do indeed exist in this format, which I think a lot of people don't realize that.
yeah. I mean, I have very limited knowledge of 8 tracks, and I am shocked to see one from as late as 1985. I would have thought maybe 81, 82 would be kind of the
You
death
are
of them.
you are correct in that that's when you stopped seeing them in retail stores in North America. I've come to find out that it's mainly a North American thing because in the UK and Australia, it seemed to die out in the mid 70s.
But speaking of things being in the correct places, it took me a long time to get into Rush because they weren't talked about. So it wasn't until the internet came along that I was seeing a lot of people saying, "You like this, 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 and this, then you would like Rush." Um, and the store that I bought most of my CDs from, and we're talking in the noughties here, um, stocked Rush, but it took me a long time to find that out because they stocked them in the heavy metal section, which is not
Right.
something I frequented, and I certainly wasn't looking for Rush there.
In the mid 70s, like when they first came out, albums like Caressive Steel and 2112 were pretty heavy for their time. So there might have been a time when you could have stuck that tag on at least some of their songs, but not by the time Power Windows came out.
No, and I mean I'm talking in the 2000s
Yeah.
where,
Well, yeah,
you
yeah.
know, in the 80s, heavy metal meant different things. I think when you
Right.
look back
Yeah.
and see what was labelled heavy metal, but
Yeah.
yeah, by that point it wasn't. Anyway, meanwhile, actually, let's just talk a bit more about Peter Collins because after Terry Brown, he would be the producer they worked with the most. But he'd obviously do this one and then follow up Hold Your Fire. Then they'd take a break and do two with Rupert Hine, and then he'd come back in the 90s. So very different albums, Counterparts and Tears for
Yeah.
Echo, which was my first Rush album.
Yeah.
And I mean, there's quite a stark difference between what they were doing in those decades. And it's interesting that he's, involved with those four albums because they're not an obvious set of four albums for one person to be a
No,
producer
they
on, I
were,
don't think.
and I think you can tell, like I said, like in the time between Hold Your Fire and Counterparts, he went on to produce. He produced Queensryche, Operation Mindcrime, which was their sort of their breakthrough album, and then Empire, which was a huge album for them, had Silent Lucidity.
Yeah.
He also produced the Promised Land album, and he produced. I'm pretty sure he was still around when they did Here the Now Frontier, which wasn't a successful album, but I think it's an overlooked album. But and he produced Alice Cooper's Hey Stupid album. He produced Suicidal Tendencies, The Art of Rebellion. Um, if anybody remembers the band Salty Dog, that was sort of a bluesy sort of rock band that was on Geffen Records. I think he produced their first album in 1990. So he produced Bon Jovi's These Days in 1995. So he was definitely branching out. He wasn't strictly a pop producer anymore. And so a lot had changed between 1987 and 1993. And also Rush were ready to sort of get rid of a lot of the keyboards and really get back to being a three-piece rock band. Power Windows and Hold Your Fire are definitely a pair. Rush did a lot of albums in pairs, and the two Rupert Hine albums, Press Don't Roll the Bones, they definitely have a similar sound too. And this is just another one of those instances. But I think that they got the right guy because, like you said, he's the only guy that they worked with. Well, I mean, the albums came out more with bigger gaps of time in between them as time went on. But yeah, he ended up producing four of their albums. So yeah, by far, I mean, I think after that is tied with Rupert Hine and Nick Raskulinecz, each producing two.
I'm just going to say what my choice is going to be from the next two options. Let's see what those are. So my two are going to be between Manhattan Project and Middletown Dreams. Um, I know you had two that you didn't want to go up against each other. If I had two that I didn't want to go up against each other, it's probably these two.
You notice there's a lot of M songs on this album?
Yes, there are. They could half of the album are M songs.
Yeah.
And I mean, you could even throw Big Money.
Big Money, yeah, yeah.
As well. But I'm going to have to go with. Yeah, I am. I said I was going to be decisive, so I'm going to be. We're going with Manhattan Project. And for those who don't know, this is what it sounds like. Manhattan Project.
Yeah.
The shortest song on the album, but still 5 minutes, and it flew by for me.
Yeah, it's when Geddy sings "Flying Out of the Shockwave," that gets me every time. Geddy's vocals sound great on this album. Like this is a real, and that is something I believe Peter Collins said to him when they were talking about working together. He says, "I can make your vocals sound 100% better." Peter Collins was kind of a, they called him a cocky little guy. They always called him Mr. Big because he always smoked
Yes.
cigars, but he was very
Yeah.
confident. But I think he did do a great job with Geddy's vocals on this album. They're just very melodic, very clean. Um, yeah, and of course, the very historically accurate song in its lyrics.
Yeah, obviously some extensive research performed by Neil on this long before there was a thing called the internet to look these things up on.
Yeah.
Um, and I'm assuming again, I mean, I was 5 at the time, if I can boast about these things. Um, so you're in the context here of the Cold War still. So this is,
Oh,
nuclear
yeah.
war is still hanging over people's heads.
Yeah, very much so. Yeah. But at the time, I mean, I knew that this song, I knew what Enola Gay was, and I obviously knew that it was about the atomic bomb. Um, I didn't know why the song was called. I was like, what does Manhattan have to do with any of this? I didn't know about that. I didn't know about
Right.
the desert and the secrecy, and I just knew that you know the Allies dropped a bomb on a couple Japanese cities, and that was the end of World War II, pretty much. But I didn't know why it was called the Manhattan Project. I found that interesting. But at that time, number one, like you said, there was no internet, so it doesn't matter anyway because you're not going to be able to look it up. And I always just expect Rush lyrics to be. I always kind of half expected Rush lyrics to be just a little bit beyond my comprehension anyway. And I just love the music.
And that's one of the great things that keeps it fresh throughout all these years is sometimes you can know the music for years and years before you actually get a handle on what the lyrics are doing.
Well, then, yeah,
Um,
like with movies and in recent years, you hear the phrase Manhattan Project a lot. So it's like, wow, it now
yeah,
I totally get it. I totally get what they were talking about.
but yeah, I mean, I always say that if I know about things, it's either because of Doctor Who or lyrics from music.
Isn't it
But
amazing when you're, let's say you're in a, let's call it a real life situation, right? Talking to quote unquote regular people, and something comes up and you happen to know something about it, and someone says, "How do you even know that?" And it's because of a lyric.
yeah, and I see as well, talking about uh, singles, that this wasn't released as a single, but it obviously did get a fair amount of radio play in America, at least, because it made the top 10 on the
Yeah,
mainstream
yeah, it
charts.
was.
I've never really understood how, because it doesn't seem like the general public are aware of songs that did well on that chart, but it's quite niche, would you say?
Yeah, what would happen is there'd be promo singles released to, say, rock radio. They weren't commercially released. Like a song like this would have been in a store at one time. This would have been, back when they sold singles. Well, I guess they kind of do now sometimes, but rock radio would get like 12-inch, white label copies of songs. And also back when radio stations had a little bit more autonomy, I think that an album would come out and sometimes they would just add like 4 or 5 songs from it right away. And I don't know how they determined chart position. I really don't understand how they determine chart position, but I do know this. The mainstream rock chart started in Billboard in 1981, didn't exist before then. And if you were to look at the top 10 mainstream rock songs from 81, 82, and 83, for the most part, they would be songs you would know that also crossed over to pop radio, to top 40 radio. After that, it started to get a little bit more niche, and you'd have songs that, if a band had a song on a soundtrack, let's say that wasn't necessarily a single, that the rock stations would play it. It's fascinating to me because, yeah, I mean, like I said, Rush had one top 40 single in the U.S. with New World Man, peaked at 21, but they had at least a dozen songs that charted on the mainstream rock chart. So they
Mhm.
obviously got a lot of play in markets where there were strong rock stations.
Yeah, I mean, even into the 90s, they're topping that chart fairly regularly.
Yeah.
And again, these are songs the general public would have no idea what they were, but they clearly reached their audience anyway. And the resulting album sales was still pretty impressive for them in the 90s as well, uh, and most of the world. So we should have a quick break from the music to talk about cover art, which is where's me just oh, there it is. There it is here. I get the feeling that this is kind of again, or 80s Rush in general, but this album cover is a little bit divisive. Maybe it's because Rush fans don't like being represented on a Rush album cover.
You know,
I haven't been that skinny in a very long time, but
I really like the fact that there are these really old TV sets. Like, and I've read Hugh Syme talking about sourcing out those old televisions. He's like, there's such an iconic look to those old sort of picture tube televisions. And even the window, if you look at the window, it looks kind of ragged and could use a paint job. Um, and yet, this figure is sitting here opening it with a remote control, which is kind of, so as in a lot of cases, the phrase power windows has a lot of meanings. And a lot of songs on this album talk about power, the abuse of power, the trying to get power, trying to get the upper hand. I do want to say, like, because I think this is important to point out, like, how if you've got a good idea, you kind of keep going with it. If you've got a cover subject that seems to work, you use them again. So the gentleman that's on this album cover, I believe his full name is Neil Cunningham. He was a stockbroker at the time. And they wanted someone, they obviously wanted somebody with a very specific look. But another one of my favorite Canadian bands, and this is more of a niche band because they were fairly big in Canada in the 80s, but they didn't really cross over anywhere else, just in pockets. They were more of an AOR band, but I'm talking about a group called Honeymoon Suite. They were a 5-piece sort of melodic rock band, sort of along the lines of, say, a Night Ranger or Survivor or that sort of sound. Their second album is called The Big Prize. It came out in early 1986, so a few months after Power Windows. If anybody's familiar with the front cover of that, you've got a group of people that are sightseeing at Niagara Falls. Now, Niagara Falls is where this band was from, which is why they were called Honeymoon Suite. It's the honeymoon capital of the world. And you've got a married couple on here. And the groom is Neil Cunningham. So Hugh Syme, and that is a Hugh Syme album cover as well. So Hugh got use of him twice.
Speaking of Hugh Syme, I don't know, Tim, if you know of any good books, for example, that he might have contributed artwork to at all.
Well, I want to thank Joseph for this because I didn't even think about this because I'm in new book mode. But yes, what he's referring to is my book, Down for the Count, the Y&T album review, and I had the absolute pleasure of having the man, the myth, the legend, Mr. Hugh Syme himself design this album cover for me. This beautiful steampunk album cover, which the colors and everything on here has always looked like his Queensryche album covers. This reminds me of Promised Land or Here in the Now Frontier, and that is absolutely fine with me. Now, Hugh also designed a Y&T album called Contagious, and I'll just open the book and show you a black and white photo of that album because, Hugh obviously has a very distinctive style to his designs. And I believe that I've went a few pages too far. We'll get there. And this is the Contagious album. So you have like a beaker that's been thrown and destroyed and broken, and something is escaping out of it, which is why Hugh included, as a nod to his own work, a little beaker that's on top of the tea here, and that is like a hidden gem, an Easter egg, because I didn't notice that at first, and once I did, I liked it even more. It was absolutely mind blowing to think that Rush and I have that much in common, that we have both employed the services of one Hugh Syme.
Well, you know what? Peter Collins is no longer with us, is he?
Peter Collins passed away just a few years ago, yeah, sadly, and so did Rupert Hine.
Yeah, I was just going to say that if Peter could make my vocals 100% better, then they'd still be pretty awful. So maybe that's no great loss to the world. If I'd been able to work with him, never mind, didn't happen. Okay, you ready for your second and
I'm
final
hoping.
choice?
Yeah, I'm very optimistic, but we'll see if that the optimism is misplaced or not.
You've got a 50-50 shot. I'm assuming that your other big
that'd
song
be a good song title for this album. Misplaced Optimism. It starts with M.
Well, one of the support bands for this tour was Marillion.
Misplaced Childhood. So. Yes, that's right. Marillion.
the M connections.
The M's have it.
To miss. All right. Well, let's see what we've got in store. I just let the last few final seconds of Manhattan Project play out there. So you have Marathon or Grand Designs. That didn't quite work. So
I'm going to go with Marathon.
Marathon.
Yeah. Okay. Grand Designs is great. It's the second track. It's the second track in the album. It's upbeat, but Marathon is a really really fun song for me. And I remember my special connection to that song was that my Rush fandom was such that so I became familiar with their music around the time of Power Windows. Hold Your Fire was the first Rush album I bought when it was somewhat current. I believe it had been out for about 6 or 7 months. The next thing to come out was their live album, A Show of Hands, in early 1989. And that was the first Rush album that I bought as soon as it came out, as soon as I could find one at a store. And they had put a live version of Marathon out as a single, and it got a fair bit of video play. So yeah, I've always really liked this song.
Excellent. Yeah, I see it wasn't another one that made top 10 in that mainstream rock chart back in the day, the live version that you're mentioning there. But of course, we're listening to the original album version. And that is giving us a side one heavy program tonight. But so this is the closer of side one. It is Marathon, and it sounds like this. One of the most 80s things about this album is the slow fade out there.
Oh yeah, very
Uh,
melodic. So much melody
yeah,
there.
and you wouldn't mistake this album from being from any other decade than what it is, but I think it's not one of those albums that feels stuck in the year that it's from.
No, I think
It's
the production has aged quite well. The drums are well recorded. Sometimes that's what kills a production in the '80s is the drum sound or perhaps the poor choice of keyboard patches. But I don't think this album you know, suffers from that. You talk about Neil's lyrics. There have been so many times I've gotten the lyric in my head. You can do a lot in a lifetime if you don't burn out too fast. And the other one I like is first you've got to last. I like that.
Yeah, and I mean when you look at Neil's life, and we know what was ahead of him, and there was a lot of tragedy to come. That of course you wouldn't wish on anybody,
Yeah.
um, and yet he lived. I think most people would say a pretty damn great life, and contributed an awful lot to a lot of people's lives in
Yeah.
doing so. So I hope he's up there and proud of all that he did achieve. Um, and I hope that Alex and Giddy are watching this and seeing how that we're, you know, helping them to choose their set list for the reunion gigs next year.
Yeah, that's like you said, we're one of the few. This is one of the few shows about Rush right now that isn't solely about uh, the. To me, I didn't see it coming. I have to say, I was surprised.
No, I was blindsided, honestly. It's like, yeah, I mean, in a good way. Well, I think a lot of people felt in a good way, and then they saw the
I,
ticket prices and
I was
maybe reconsidered.
I was really shocked at first. Once the shock wore off, I thought, hey, there's a lot of people that got into Rush either after they stopped touring or even after Neil was gone. And who's to say that you can't go, and see them? If Getty and Alex are lifers, they're lifelong
Yeah,
musicians, they're lifelong friends, and they were together for 6 years or so before Neil, and they're friends for life, right? They're practically like brothers. So I haven't got any problem with it now. I haven't attempted to get tickets because there are no shows anywhere close to me, and that's fine. I was fortunate enough. I saw them way back on the R30 tour in 2004, which seems like a long time ago now, and I thought it was pretty long in the stretch then. It was fantastic. And what's really ironic about this is that about a week before the news broke that Rush were going out on tour, I had just gotten tickets for myself and my two kids who, because of me, have become Rush fans, and to go see a Rush tribute band that's going to be playing not far from where I live, which doesn't is I've never seen a Rush cover band before. There's never been one come close. So I thought, yeah, that would be fun. And then I'm thinking that would be the closest thing. And then of course they make this announcement, but that's okay. I'm still looking forward to it. Because I think the band's called Infinity Rush. I'm not familiar with them, but I mean, if you're going to be a Rush cover band, you've got to have your chops together. So I've no doubt it's going to
yeah.
be entertaining.
All right. So we've got just one more choice to be made, and it's by me. And anybody who knows this album knows what's left. Anybody who's hearing the album, or at least half of the album for the first time, make yourselves known, because you're probably not one of the great swathe of people discovering Rush for the first time. But you never know. I always hope anything could be somebody's entry point. You just
Yes,
and I've
absolutely.
seen this a number of times. Uh, random things happen because of stuff you put on the internet that, you know, it changes one little part of the universe for somebody, hopefully. That's always my hope, that that will be something that gets achieved in all my internet ramblings. So on that note, I'll go through the motions and see what order it's going to give me them in, and it's giving them to me in album order. So obviously it's between Emotion Detector, which is the one track they've never played live, and Mystic Rhythms. Now, I think it makes a certain amount of sense to keep with the M theme, and also we opened with the opener, so let's close with the closer. And I hope I haven't zapped your other absolute favorite in the process.
You're playing right into it now, because just really quick, how I said that The Big Money was the first Rush song that I ever heard. That was in December of 1985. So fast forward about a month to January 1986. I'm in the Atlantic Canada, the easternmost part of Canada, and we didn't have MTV in Canada. We had something called Much Music, which went on the air
Right.
in 1984, 3 years after MTV went on the air. In my particular neck of the woods, we didn't have Much Music until early 1986, and I distinctly remember being on, well, it wasn't quite one of these old televisions, but it was an old black and white, very small television with a manual channel changer on it. And at this particular time, it was a Saturday night, and there was nothing assigned to channel 8 on my local town's cable package. This particular, I'm going clip, 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 clip. There's something on channel 8, turn back. And it's a video. It's a very strange video. It's a very strange video with a skeleton and little tiny skeletons moving inside the skeleton. And then it cuts to this band playing, and there's this guy with this drum set that takes up the entire screen, and everything's from the top down. And the guitar player is going this way, and the bass player and singer's going this way. It's Mystic Rhythms. And that's when I realized we had Much Music. And Much Music was a tremendous source of musical information for me. I learned so much from watching it. And I know that I would not be the Rush fan I became if it wasn't for Much Music, because they supported Canadian acts, old and new. And within, a few months, I'd seen a handful of Rush videos, enough to know that I didn't just like one song, I liked everything I'd heard from them. So I saw Subdivisions and Distant Early Warning and Tom Sawyer and Closer to the Heart, Red Sector A. I just knew that I liked this band. So I may have gotten into them years later, but not at the age that I was, because it was a long time before I met anybody who had barely even heard of Rush, never mind liked them. It was years before I met other Rush fans. So yeah, so Big Money and Mystic Rhythms are two very important songs for me for the history of Rush. And I think Mystic Rhythms is such a cool song. It's so atmospheric. It's very different for them. Neil just keeps that steady bass drum all the way through it. I love the mix of electronic and acoustic drums. Alex acoustic guitar is beautiful in it. It's another great vocal from Geddy. I love the synth work. Again, atmospheric. The lyrics are fantastic. They're realistic, but yet there's a touch of the unknown. So nothing against Emotion Detector, but yeah, I think that I'll be honest with you, the only one that I would have considered maybe going differently, I happen to have a real soft spot for Middletown Dreams. I think that's a really melodic.
So do I.
Yeah, a real melodic Rush song. I love the dreams go across the heartland, and so between that and Manhattan Project would have been the toughest choice for me. But so far, I think we're really on our game here. So yes, I'm all for playing Mystic Rhythms.
All right. Well, I'm glad that I didn't steal your childhood away from you by going the other route. So
I would have had to
yeah,
talk about
indeed.
it anyway, but it just works out that we're going to play it. So people are like, oh, well, what does this song sound like that he's talking about?
Well, I'm glad you asked, because it sounds like this.
A long fade, you often don't.
Mhm.
I often shut it off before then, but it's a great. And that's another thing about the production on this album. There's so much ear candy. There's so many,
Mm.
there's so many little things that catch your attention, especially if you're listening to it with a good pair of headphones.
All Rush fans know that these three are at the absolute top of their game almost all of the time. But I think certainly on this album, the playing and, as you've already mentioned, Gilly singing is right up there. And maybe you could say the songs are a bit simpler than, well, a lot simpler than some of their 70s work, but it's just as intricate and rich. And I can't fault any of it particularly, and I don't care to try.
Yeah, it's a
Now,
great album. It's a very listenable album.
yeah, and I just think I think the same for Grace Under Pressure, actually. I know it was a much more difficult album for them to record, but again, the songwriting is really strong
Yeah.
throughout that one and the performances as well. And I've got a soft spot for Hold Your Fire as well, which, I mean,
Very
as I
soft
say,
spot for Hold Your Fire, because like I said, that was new fandom for me, and I do think of the two Peter Collins albums in the '80s, I do think Power Windows is the stronger album.
yeah, I'd have to agree with that. Not sure it makes it my favorite, but it's, pretty close between them anyway. But yeah, fantastic. It's certainly one of my favorite Rush albums, and it is one. Uh, I've got the physical copy, which means I bought it over here. So I've had it within the last 15 years, which is, I probably only had 3 or 4 Rush albums before I left NZ. But that has taken us through another great slice of classic rock. Can use that generic catch-all term. One last thing before we go, because I already managed to sneak a Marillion reference in earlier on, but I'm contractually obliged to mention Marillion as often as possible with any tenuous links that are going. And I actually hadn't even realized it is written in these very, very tiny credits that part of the recording was done at Syme Studios in London. And
Yep.
one of the assistant engineers on those sessions was Dave Megan,
Yep.
who for those who don't know, speaking of producers who did 4 albums with the band, produced certainly 3, and I would say 4 of the great Steve Hogarth era Marillion albums, from Brave, Afraid of Sunlight, Marbles, and the contentious one, Arachnophobia. So I just thought I'd throw that out there, because, like I was saying, if I can say Marillion for any reason, I will do so.
I'm much the same with Y&T. I have to be honest. And what it's called being a fan.
Yeah.
And a supporter. Yeah. Dave Megan also, I think a major cornerstone of his resume. I think he was an assistant engineer on U2's The Joshua Tree.
Right.
I think that
I didn't know that.
might have been the biggest selling of all of the albums he was involved in. But he was part of that. I think he was involved with that whole Trevor Horn, ZTT Records. Like, he came out of that stable of British production, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, when they we're going off on a tangent here, folks, but hey, if you stuck with us this long, you're doing okay. He was brought in by EMI to kind of give Marillion an indie/prog mix. Was the idea of the A&R man who put them together, looking for a quick album that would come in under budget, which of course isn't what happened, but that's a story for another day. The story for today has been a great talk about one of the great Canadian bands of all time. I don't think I'm stretching anything to say that, and certainly one of my favourites for many, many years. And for those who are going to see them next year, have a fantastic time, and don't worry about all the money that you spent.
Just, hey, it's a once in a lifetime thing, and it's a thing that a lot of people probably thought was no more in a lifetime. It's done. You're never going to see them again.
Yeah.
So it'll be done. They'll do it the right way. They'll pay tribute to Neil, and it'll be great. There's always a touch of class to what these guys do.
Yeah, they wouldn't be doing this if they didn't feel it was right. And
if they were doing it without class, they'd have done it right after he died. They'd have been looking for drummers.
Yeah, exactly. So on that note, thanks as always to Tim for joining me for my random excursions. Thanks to you for watching, and we'll simply say bye for now, but hopefully not for long.
It's the end, but the moment has been prepared for.